There was no appeal court in ancient Athens, and in the normal course of events, death sentences were carried out fairly promptly. As it happened, however, Socrates' conviction coincided with a religious festival, during which the Athenians refrained from executing people who had been sentenced to death. So there was a considerable delay between trial and execution. Plato's dialogue Crito is set in this interim period. Socrates' friend Crito offers him the opportunity to escape from prison and go and live in exile. Everything is arranged, he says. He has bribed the people he needs to bribe. He has friends in Thessaly with whom Socrates can go and stay. All he has to do is go. Socrates refuses. What would be the point, he asks. I am 70 years old with not many years to live. What would I do in exile? I have spent my life discussing questions of right and wrong and arguing that nothing anyone else does to me can harm me, that I can only harm myself by acting unjustly. If I now disobey the laws of my country, I will be harming myself by acting unjustly, and I shall make myself a laughingstock into the bargain. And so Socrates remains in prison, awaiting execution. Execution in ancient Athens was probably a more civilized procedure than it has been anywhere at any time since. Executions were carried out at sunset, and the method of execution was drinking hemlock, which Plato's account suggests was not a painful or unpleasant death. The condemned man was allowed to spend the day with friends and family, and within reason to spend it as he chose. Phaedo shows us how Socrates chose to spend a portion of his last day. What he chooses to do, at the request of his friends, is review the arguments for the immortality of the soul. However, what countless people over the last 2,000 years have found so impressive and so moving are the calmness, courage, and clarity with which Socrates discusses these things in the hours leading up to his death. Phaedo by Plato.
Were you there yourself, Phaedo, in the prison with Socrates, the day he drank the poison? Or did you hear about it from somebody else?
I was there myself, Socrates.
What was it the man said before he died? And what was the manner of his death? I'd very much like to hear. Practically nobody from Rebellious ever goes to stay in Athens these days. And we haven't had a visitor from there for ages to give us a reliable account of what happened. All we heard was that he drank poison and died. Apart from that, no details at all.
Didn't you even hear about the trial then, and the way that turned out?
Yes, that much we did hear. And we were surprised that it was clearly such a long time after the trial that he was put to death. Why was that, Phaedo?
Quite by chance, Socrates. The ship the Athenians sent to Delos had just had the wreath put on its stern the day before the trial.
What ship?
The ship, according to the Athenians, in which Theseus once went to Crete with the 7 youths and 7 maids, and saved their lives and his own life. They had vowed to Apollo, so the story goes, that if they escaped they would send a mission to Delos every year in payment. And ever since that time, right up to the present day, they've gone on sending it to the god every year. Once they've started the mission, the law says they shall keep the city free from bloodshed during this period, and not carry out any official death sentence until the ship has reached Delos and returned to Athens again. If the winds hold them back, this can take a long time. The mission begins when the priest of Apollo puts a wreath on the stern of the ship. And as I say, this in fact took place on the day before the trial. That was why Socrates spent a long time in prison between his trial and his death.
Right. But what about his actual death, Phaedo? What was talked about? What was done? Which of his friends were there? Or would the authorities not allow them to be there? Did he die alone without his friends?
No, there were friends there. A large number, in fact.
You must give us the most accurate account you can. Or are you busy?
No, I'll try and tell you about it. I'm not busy. Remembering Socrates, whether I'm speaking myself or listening to someone else speaking, is always my favorite occupation.
In that case, Phaedo, you have an audience after your own heart. So try and tell us all about it in as much detail as possible.
Well then, I found it an extraordinary experience being there. You'd expect me to have felt a wave of pity at the death of a close friend, but I didn't. He struck me as happy, Echecrates, both in his demeanour and in what he said. So fearlessly and nobly did he meet his end. And in consequence, I got a strong feeling that he would not be going to the next world without some divine protection, and that if ever anyone was going to be all right when he got there, he would be. For that reason, I felt virtually none of the pity you'd have expected in someone present at such a tragic event. But then again, neither did I feel pleasure at our discussing philosophy in our usual way, though that is what our conversation was about. No, I just had this strange feeling, this unfamiliar mixture of pleasure and pain together, as I thought about the fact that he was shortly going to die. All of us there were in more or less the same state, now laughing, now crying, and one of us particularly so, Apollodorus. You know him, of course. You know how he is.
Of course I do.
Well, he was acutely affected in the way I've described. But I was upset myself, and so were the others.
Who exactly was there, Phaedo?
Well, of the Athenians, I've mentioned Apollodorus. Then there was Critobulus and his father, plus Hermogenes, Epigenes, Aeschines, and Antisthenes. Ctesippus from the deme of Pyaenus was there as well, and Menexenus and some other Athenians. Plato was ill, I think.
Were there any foreigners there?
Yes. Simmias the Theban with Cebes and Phaedondas, and from Megara, Euclides and Terpsia.
What about Aristippus and Cleombrotus? Were they there?
No, they were in Aegina, apparently.
And was anyone else there?
No, I think that was about all.
What about the conversation then? How did it go?
I'll try and give you a full account, starting from the beginning. We'd got in the habit of visiting Socrates, I and the others, particularly during the last few days. We'd meet early at the courthouse where the trial had taken place, since it was close to the prison. We'd wait there every morning, talking to one another, until the prison opened, which wasn't very early. When it did open, we'd go in and see Socrates, and usually spend the day with him. This time, we assembled rather earlier. We'd heard, when we left the prison the previous evening, that the ship was in from Delos. So we passed the word to one another to come to the meeting place as early as possible. When we turned up, the doorkeeper, who generally answered the door, came out and told us to wait, and not go in until he himself told us. The 11 are releasing Socrates from his fetters, and making arrangements for him to be put to death today. But it wasn't long before he came back and told us to go in. And as we went in, we found Socrates just released from his fetters, and also Xanthippe, whom you know, sitting beside him holding their youngest child. When Xanthippe saw us, she urged us to be silent, and then said one of those things women will say, "Socrates, this is the last time your friends will talk to you, or you to them." Socrates glanced at Crito. "Make sure someone sees her home," he said. She was taken home, crying aloud and lamenting by some of Crito's people, while Socrates sat up on his bed, flexing his leg and rubbing it with his hand. And as he rubbed it, he said, "What a strange thing it seems, gentlemen, this thing men call pleasure, and how surprisingly connected with its apparent opposite, pain. They won't come to a man both together, but if you go after one of them and get it, you're always pretty well bound to get the other as well, as if the two of them were joined at the head." If he'd thought about it, I expect Aesop would have written a fable about God wanting to stop them fighting, but not being able to, and so joining their heads together for them. And and that being the reason why anyone who experiences one of them finds the other following on after it as well. That's certainly what seems to have happened to me. The pain in my leg from the fetter seems to have been succeeded by the pleasure following on after it. Here, Kebes intervened. Thank you, Socrates. Thank you for reminding me. Those verses you wrote, setting to music the stories of Aesop and the invocation to Apollo. Several people, notably Venus the day before yesterday, have been asking me your reasons for composing those pieces when you came here, though you'd never done anything like it before. So if you're at all interested in my being able to give Venus an answer next time he asks me, and I know he will ask, tell me what I should say. Tell him the truth, Kebes. Tell him I didn't write them out of any desire to compete with him or his compositions. I knew that would be no easy task. No, I was interested in the meaning of some of my dreams, and I wanted to satisfy my conscience, in case those were the kind of works they'd been telling me to produce all this time. I'll tell you about them. There's a recurring dream I've had all through my life. It appears in different forms at different times, but always the same thing. Compose music, Socrates. Make that your work. In the past, I've taken it to be encouraging me, telling me to do what I was already doing, in the way the crowd cheers on the runners in a race. The same with my dream. I thought it was telling me to do what I was already doing, i.e. make music, since I thought philosophy was the finest form of music, and that was what I was doing. But then the trial took place, and the festival of the god prevented my being put to death, and I wondered if just possibly the dream had been telling me all those times to compose music in this popular sense. So to be on the safe side, I thought I had better not depart without first satisfying my conscience by doing what the dream said and writing some poems. So I started off by writing one to the god whose festival it was. And after the god, I decided that a writer, if he was going to be a writer, should write fiction rather than fact. I had no talent for story writing myself, and for that reason I took ready-made stories that I knew by heart, those of Aesop, and made poems out of the first ones I came across. That's what you can tell Venus, Kebes. Say goodbye to him for me. Tell him, if he has any sense, to follow me as soon as he can. I'm leaving today, apparently. That is the order of the Athenians. And Simmias said, That's a funny piece of advice to give Venus, Socrates. I've met him several times, and from what I've seen of him, there's not the slightest chance of his doing what you suggest, if he can avoid it. Really? Is Venus not a philosopher? I believe him to be, said Simmias. Then he'll be happy to. Venus and anyone else who is serious about being a philosopher. He probably won't do violence to himself, though. They say that's not permitted. As he said this, he lowered his legs to the ground and maintained this sitting position through the rest of the conversation. Then Kebes asked him, What do you mean, Socrates, by saying it is not permitted to do violence to yourself, but that all the same the philosopher will be very happy to follow in the footsteps of the dying? Really, Kebes, haven't you and Simmias learned all about that in your time with Philolaus? We haven't learned anything for certain, Socrates. Well, even I only know about it from hearsay, but I can't see any objections to telling you what I've heard. After all, it may be especially appropriate for someone who is about to make the journey to the other world to inquire and speculate about what life in that world is like. Besides, what else is there for us to do in the interval between now and sunset? In that case, Socrates, why do they say it is not permitted for a man to kill himself? In reply to your question a moment ago, I have heard Philolaus say when he was living in Thebes, and I've heard it from other people as well, that it is wrong to do this. But I've never heard anybody give a convincing reason why. Well, you must keep trying. You may yet find the answer. But it probably will strike you as strange if this, unlike other human situations, is uniquely clear-cut. if it never turns out that at some times and for some people death is better than life. And if death is better for them, it probably strikes you as strange that it is wrong for them to do themselves this favor. They have to wait for someone else to do it for them. Kebes laughed quietly in agreement. Aye, God knows, he replied in his own dialect. Yes, because looked at like that, it would seem illogical. And yet there may be some logic in it all the same. The argument which is put forward for this view in mystery religions, that we men are in a prison of some sort, and that a man has no right to release himself from it or escape from it, seems to me an important one, and not easy to understand fully. However, part of it at least I think is right, Kebes. The part which says that those keeping an eye on us are gods, and that we men are among the gods' possessions. Or don't you agree with that? No, I do agree with it. In that case, wouldn't you be angry if one of your possessions did away with itself without you indicating your consent to its death? Wouldn't you punish it if you had any means of punishment? I certainly would. On this argument, then, perhaps it is not illogical that a man is not allowed to kill himself, but must wait for God to send some unavoidable fate, such as mine now. That seems fair enough, said Kebes, as far as it goes. But you also said a moment ago that philosophers would be quite happy to die. That has a strange sound to it, if we were right just now in saying that the person keeping an eye on us is a god, and that we are his possessions. It doesn't make sense that the wisest men should have no objection to leaving this position in which they are under the supervision of the gods, who are finest of all supervisors. The wise man surely doesn't think he's going to look after himself any better once he is free. A stupid man might think that, and think he should try to get away from his master. It might not dawn on him that it's a mistake to get away from a good one. Rather, he should stay where he is as long as he can, which is why it is irrational to try and get away. Anyone with any sense, on the other hand, would presumably be keen to spend all his time with one better than himself. On this argument, Socrates, you'd expect it to be the opposite of the view just put forward. It makes sense for the wise to be upset at dying, and the foolish to be pleased. Socrates seemed to me to approve of Kebes' determination. He glanced at us. Always looking for an argument, is Kebes. He's not easily prepared to take anyone else's word for anything. Yes, but for once, Socrates, said Simmias, Kebes has a point. Even I think so. Why would truly wise men want to get away from masters who are better than themselves? Why would they be glad to leave them? I think Kebes' argument is directed at you. You seem quite happy to leave us and your good rulers, who are, as you yourself agree, gods. That's a fair objection. What you're really saying, I take it, is that I should defend myself on this charge, just as I defended myself in court. Exactly, said Simmias. Very well. I'll see if I can make a more convincing defense to you than I did to the jury. My position, Simmias and Kebes, is this. If I didn't believe, first, that I am going to meet other good and wise gods, and second, that I shall join men, those who have died, better than the ones here, then it will be wrong of me not to be upset at the prospect of death. As it is, I can assure you that I expect to find good men, though I would not state that as a certainty. But as for my belief that the gods I shall encounter as my masters will be wholly good, all I can say is that if there is any belief of this kind which I would state as a certainty, it is this one. And that is the reason why I am not so very upset. I am confident that there is something in store for people after their deaths, something much better, as is traditionally said, for the good than for the bad. Fair enough, Socrates, said Simmias, but do you intend to keep this knowledge to yourself when you leave us, or can you share it with us? We all regard it as a good to be shared, and in any case it can be the defense you were talking about, if we find what you say convincing. I'll do my best then. But first let's see what Crito here wants. He's been trying to say something to me for some time now, I think. It's nothing really, Socrates, said Crito. Just that the man who is going to administer the poison has been saying to me for a while now that I should advise you to talk as little as possible. He says people get heated if they talk too much, and this is not the best way to go about taking the poison. Those who do sometimes have to drink the poison 2 or 3 times. Pay no attention to him, said Socrates. He'll just have to be prepared to do his stuff twice, or even 3 times if necessary. I was pretty sure that was what he would say, said Crito, but he's been pestering me for some time now. Don't worry about him. Now, you people are my jury, so I'd like to try and defend my view that it is perfectly reasonable for a man who has truly spent his life in philosophy not to be afraid at the approach of death, but to have high hopes that when he dies, he will win great rewards in the next world. How this can be, Simmias and Kebes, I will now try and explain. Most people probably don't realize that for those who have genuinely been engaged in philosophy in the truest sense of the word, dying and being dead are just exactly what they've been practicing. That and nothing else. And if that's the case, there would be some absurdity, I imagine, in spending your whole life looking forward to this one thing, and then, when it came, getting upset at what you have been looking forward to and practicing for. Simmias laughed. Damn it, Socrates. I wasn't feeling at all like laughing a moment ago, but you've made me laugh now. I think most people, hearing you say what you've just said, would regard it as a fair comment on philosophers. Certainly, where we come from, they couldn't agree more, to say that philosophers really might just as well be dead. As far as they're concerned, they say, it's quite clear that it would serve philosophers right if that's what did happen to them. And they'd be right, Simmias, apart from the bit about it being quite clear to them. What isn't clear to them is in what way true philosophers might as well be dead, nor in what way death would serve them right, nor what sort of death they deserve. Still, never mind them. Let us pursue our own discussion and forget about them. Do we hold that there is such a thing as death? Of course, replied Simmias. Isn't it just the separation of the soul from the body? Isn't that what being dead is? The body being all by itself, separated from the soul, and the soul being all by itself, separated from the body. Surely death can't be anything other than this, can it? No, that's exactly what it is. In that case, my friend, see if perhaps you agree with me about this next question as well. I think it will help us to a better understanding of what we are investigating. Do you think it is the mark of a philosopher to be enthusiastic about what are called pleasures, those of food and drink, for example? No, Socrates. What about the pleasures of sex? Certainly not. What about the rest of the body's needs? Do you think this sort of man regards them as important? I mean, things like the possession of smart clothes and shoes, and the other things people use to improve their physical appearance. Does he value those, or does he regard them beyond the bare necessities with contempt? I think the true philosopher regards them with contempt. In general, then, would you say a man like this is not concerned with the body, that as far as he can, he has disassociated himself from it and turned towards the soul? Yes, I would. Aren't things like this one way in which the philosopher, more than anyone else, releases his soul as completely as he can from its partnership with the body? It looks like it. And do most people think, Simmias, that for the man who takes no pleasure in those kind of things and has nothing to do with them, life is not worth living? That the man who has no interest in the pleasures which come from the body is only one remove from being dead? Absolutely right. Now, what about the actual acquisition of wisdom? If you take the body along with you as a partner in your search, is it or isn't it a hindrance? I'll give you an example of what I mean. Do sight and hearing bring men any truth? Isn't it a constant theme, even in the poets, that nothing we hear or see can be relied on? And if these senses are not reliable or accurate, it is hardly likely the other bodily senses will be, since they are all, I take it, inferior to the first two. Don't you agree? Yes, I do agree. In that case, when does the soul make contact with the truth? When it tries to look at something in partnership with the body, it is obviously deceived by it. True. Isn't it in reasoning then, if anywhere, that any of these things that are become clear to it? Yes. And it reasons best, I take it, when none of those things troubles it. Neither hearing nor sight, neither pain nor pleasure. When it is as much on its own as it can be, when it pays no attention to the body, has as little to do with it as possible, avoids touching it, and so reaches out for what is. That is so. So, here too the soul of the philosopher treats the body with complete contempt, avoiding it and trying to get to be alone by itself. It looks that way. What about this next point, Simmias? Do we say there is something just, all by itself, or is there no such thing? We say there is such a thing, most emphatically. And again, something right and good. Of course. Have you at any time in your life seen one of them with your eyes? No. Have you ever grasped them by means of any other bodily perception? I'm talking about all of them, things like size, health, strength, about the being, to put it briefly, of all the rest of them, what each one actually is. Is it through the body that the soul views what is truest in them? Or is it more like this? Won't those of us who are best equipped to think as long and as clearly as possible about each object of our inquiry just by itself come closest in each case to knowing it? Yes, that's exactly how it is. Wouldn't this be done most purely by the man who approaches each one as far as possible with thought alone, without taking sight into account at all in his thinking, and not dragging in any other sense as a partner in his reasoning? He uses thought in its pure form, all by itself, in an attempt to track down each one of the things that are, in its pure form, just by itself. He frees himself, as far as possible, from his eyes, ears, and to all intents and purposes, from the whole of his body, in the belief that it is a distraction, and that when it is in partnership with the soul, the body stops at acquiring truth and knowledge. Isn't this the man, Simmias, if anyone, who will grasp what really is? What you say is absolutely right, Socrates. The result of all these arguments, then, is that there comes to be a widespread opinion among true philosophers of the kind which leads them to say to one another, "It looks as if there is some kind of shortcut which can bring us out on the right track. As long as we keep the body, and our soul is contaminated by evil of that kind, we shall never really obtain the object of our desire, which we say is truth. The body's demands for nourishment create 101 distractions, and if we are attacked by disease, then again we are abstracted in our search for what is. The body fills us with all kinds of lusts, desires, fears, phantoms, and a great deal of nonsense, with the result that we really and truly never ever, as the saying goes, get a chance to think about anything at all. The body and its desires are entirely responsible for war, faction, and fighting, since it is the acquisition of money which is responsible for all wars, and it is the body which compels us to acquire money. We are slaves in its service. So, for all these reasons, the body gives us no time for philosophy. Worst of all, if it does give us any time off, and we do get a chance to inquire into anything, the body keeps cropping up at every point in our inquiry, causing chaos and confusion, unsettling us, and so preventing us seeing the truth. No, it has been well and truly proved to us that if we are ever going to gain pure knowledge of anything, we must get rid of the body and look at things themselves with the soul itself. It will be when we die, apparently, so the argument suggests, and not while we are alive, that we shall get the thing we desire and claim to be in love with, namely, wisdom. After all, if it is impossible to gain pure knowledge of anything with the body, then we are left with two alternatives. Either it is impossible to acquire knowledge anywhere, or it is possible only for the dead. Then, and only then, will the soul be by itself, apart from the body. And while we are alive, we shall be closest to knowledge, it seems, if, as far as possible, we refuse to associate with the body or have anything to do with it beyond what is absolutely unavoidable. We must not infect ourselves with the body's nature, but keep ourselves in a state of purity from it until God Himself sets us free. That is the way we can be pure and freed from the body's foolishness. We shall be with others who are pure, in all probability, and we shall know through ourselves everything that is untainted. And this, perhaps, is truth. I suspect it is not permitted for what is not pure to have contact with what is pure. That, I think, Simmias, is what all true lovers of knowledge are bound to say and feel. Don't you agree? I couldn't agree more, Socrates. In which case, my friend, if that is true, there is good reason for anyone who goes where I'm going to hope that there, if anywhere, he will fully possess that which so much of our energy has been directed towards in our past life. This means that the journey I am now required to make is cause for optimism, as it would be for anyone who thinks that his mind has been, as it were, purified. Cause for optimism indeed, said Simmias. And hasn't purification been agreed, a little earlier in our discussion, to be the fullest possible separation of the soul from the body, and its growing accustomed to assembling and gathering itself together, all by itself, completely removed from the body, and living all on its own, as far as it can, both in this life and the next, freed from the fetters of the body? Yes, that is agreed. Is this what we call death, then? The release or separation of soul from body? Exactly that. And in our view, it's mainly, in fact only, philosophers who are eager to release it. Isn't the practice of philosophy just this? The release and separation of soul from body? It looks like it. So, as I said in the first place, wouldn't it be absurd for a man to be preparing himself during his lifetime to live in the closest possible proximity to death, and to live his life in this way, but then to get upset when death came to him? Yes, it would be absurd, obviously. In that case, Simmias, true lovers of wisdom really do practice dying, and being dead is less terrifying to them than to anyone else in the world. Look at it this way. If they are altogether opposed to the body, and want to keep their soul completely on its own, wouldn't it be highly irrational for them to be frightened and upset when this happens? Wouldn't they go gladly to the place where they can expect, on arrival, to find what they desired all their lives, this being wisdom, and to be rid of the constant company of what they were opposed to? There have been plenty of people ready and willing to go down to Hades to follow their human loves, boyfriends, wives, children who have died, spurred on by the hope that they will see and be with those whom they once desired. So will a true lover of wisdom, one who holds fast to the very same hope, that the only place he will come upon wisdom worth speaking of is in Hades, be upset when he dies? Will he not go there gladly? Of course he will, my friend, if he really is a philosopher. He'll be convinced that this is the only place he's going to come upon wisdom in its pure form. And that being so, as I've just said, wouldn't it be highly irrational for a man like this to fear death? Yes, indeed, the height of irrationality. So, if you see a man getting upset at the prospect of dying, isn't that a clear indication that he wasn't a lover of wisdom after all, but a lover of the body? And the same man turns out also, I imagine, to be a lover of money and reputation, one or the other of these, or maybe both. Yes, it is exactly as you say. Well now, Simmias, isn't what we call courage a distinguishing characteristic of people such as we have been describing? It certainly is. And self-control as well, or even what most people call self-control. Not getting carried away with one's desires, but treating them with calm contempt. Isn't this a characteristic only of those who have an utter contempt for the body and who live a philosophic life? It's bound to be. And that's because there's a paradox in the courage and self-control of other people, as you will see if you care to examine them. What sort of paradox, Socrates? You know how everyone who isn't a philosopher regards death as one of the great evils. Of course. So when brave men face death, they do so through fear of greater evils. That is so. In which case, it is through being afraid, through fear, that everyone apart from the philosopher is brave. But being brave as a result of fear and cowardice is a paradox. Yes, it is. And what about those of them who are well-ordered? Isn't it just the same with them? Isn't it lack of discipline which somehow makes them self-controlled? We say that's impossible, but all the same, what happens to them with their unphilosophical self-control is very similar. They desire one set of pleasures and are frightened of losing them, so they abstain from other pleasures because they are controlled by the first set. Being ruled by pleasures is called lack of discipline. Yet for these people, the situation is that they control some pleasures by being under the control of others. That's roughly what we were saying just now, about people being in some way self-controlled through lack of discipline. Yes, that is the way it looks. Really, Simmias, I do hope this is not the right kind of trade in virtue, trading pleasure for pleasure, pain for pain, and fear for fear. The greater for the lesser, like currencies. I hope there is just the one true currency, namely wisdom, for which one should trade all the others, and that with this currency, wisdom, come true courage, self-control, and justice. True goodness, in short, with or without pleasures, fears, and everything else of that sort. As for the exchange of these for one another, in the absence of wisdom, virtue of this kind may be no more than an optical illusion. Real slaves' virtue, in fact, possessing no health or truth. The truth may be that in reality, self-control, justice, and courage are a kind of purifying from things of that sort, and that wisdom itself is a kind of purification. It looks as if those who established our mystic rites may not have been such fools after all. What their riddles may have really been doing all this time is showing us that anyone who arrives in Hades uninitiated and without experience of the rites will be cast into the mire, whereas the person who arrives there in a state of purification and initiation will dwell with the gods. As the experts in the rites tell us, full many bear the novice wand, yet few will wear the Bacchic crown. And these, in my view, are simply the ones who have practiced philosophy correctly. What I have been doing throughout my life is concentrate all my efforts on becoming one of them, leaving nothing undone which was in my power to do. Whether my efforts have been rightly directed, and whether we have been getting anywhere, we shall know for certain, God willing, when we get there. Pretty soon, I imagine.